I heard somebody say something. Yeah, to teach others, but there were some conditions that he had to meet in order to do those things, in order to maintain his riches and all that other stuff that he had. No, these are conditions in the covenant because he made the covenant bringing him out of with his kindred. He didn't put the covenant in bold words like he's going to do later on here, but he made the covenant with him and tell him that he would reward him. He would give him certain things. What was those things that the conditions that he told Abram that he had to meet before he could receive the reward? He had to, one more time, disengage himself from his family. That's one of them, one of the main conditions. Because as he was traveling, and the land that he was in belonged to the Amorites and the Moabites. So now you got them with their cattle and everything in the land, and you got Abram with all his riches and cattle and stuff in the land. You got Lot that's in the land with all his stuff, and the land would not support all of these with adequate substance. So it comes to the point where the two families were having some strife in the fact that Lot's herdsmen didn't like what Abram's herdsmen were doing, and neither one of them liked what the people in the land were doing. See, the Amorites, they were in the land and they were natives of the land, but this is the land that God had gave to Abraham. Now, the Bible doesn't say that whether the Lord told the Amorites that he had given this land to Abraham, but the Bible says that the land was given to him not as an inheritance, but as a reward for following. No, what happened was he came back and he saw what was going on, and he went to Lot and he said, "Let there not be strife between us." In other words, let not there be any animosity between us. We're family. We're blood. Why would we want to fight one another? But there was that tension growing. So he said to Lot, "Why don't you take the land on the right for you, and I'll take the land on the left. Or you can take the land on the left, and I'll take the land on the right." Well, Lot did what we would do. I won't say we, I'll just say what most of us would do. He stood up and he went to surveying. Looking to the right and looking to the left to see which was the most plentiful and the best part of the land to take. That's what I said. That's what most of us would do. Instead of just saying, "Okay, Unc, I'll take to the right and go." But we got to find out what's over there to the right and what's over there to the left. You've given me my choice, so now I'll look and see. And his intentions, just like our intentions would be, was to take the most fruitful part of the land, not knowing that the land was just as fruitful on either side. Whether they went to the right or went to the left. The only difference is one went to where there was inhabitants, and the other was like in the country. Now, after Lot surveyed it, he's a city boy. He took the left, which took him down close to the city, not having a clue that what he was doing and what he liked was about to cause him more problems. Now, here we go with how God was rewarding Abraham. After Lot departed and went about his way, God told him, says, get up, look about, take a walk, and all that you survey, I'll give to you. Now, Abram, he walked around the portion that Lot had taken, which Lot had not yet figured out, that by going to the right, he would be having land around you. You would be in the center, which Abram's land did. And God told him, says, where you stop at, if the dust you can count, so be the land and your heirs. And that's coming from what he said in Genesis, that the stars, if you can number them, then that would be the number that I will place on you of your hairs. Now, as he got down into, well, Lot got down into his working area there, and he found out, and he built an altar unto the Lord. And in building this altar unto the Lord, he gave thanks and worshiped the Lord. Now we drop down to verse 6. Well, we've just finished talking about verse 6, where the land was not able to bear all of that. And we get into verse 9. And it says, is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me, if thou wilt. If the whole land before thee, and if all this land before you, separate yourself. Go either way, in which he had chosen the route that he wanted to take. Now, we can find reference to all of this and how it took place in Genesis 3, and it tells us in that particular scripture that Lot lifted up his eyes and he had greed in his eyes, which is what I just said. If we got the same choice, we'd have greed in our eyes too. Hey, I got a choice of all of this. Let me find what's more fruitful. But Lot looked upon it, and he had greed in his eyes, and we find reference to that in Genesis 3 and 6. But even more so than that, Matthew 3 and 5 will give you an even clearer understanding of it. Because, see, what Abraham's land was, it had the largest river in Palestine rising at the foot. Now, it's kind of hard to believe, but as I studied this, it found out that this land covered more than 200 miles. It was 653 feet below sea level. Now, if you think about that for a minute, and it's 653 feet below sea level, and you got a river running through it, that's floodland. But back then, I don't guess it was, because this was before God caused it to rain and flood and kill everything. But today, if we step outside over there on Lake Erie and it come a big storm, if you can't swim, you better be getting out of there. because it will jump on you. As we go on down through here, Genesis 6 and 13 and 7, Genesis 9, 11 and 15, we find those same words that we just finished talking about. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah, which we talked is really talked about in Genesis 14 and 2, was even as the garden of the Lord, the paradise of Eden, with its four streams, Genesis in 10, though it be some, this is deemed unsatisfactory, and the praise taken at Mesopotamia, which was land of rare and was irrigated by the Nile, by its canals and its well machine, as thou comest unto Zoar. We get into 11. It says that then Lot chose the plain of Jordan, allured by its beauty and its fertility, and heedless of other or higher considerations. And he journeyed off into his land, and they separated themselves one from another. And Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, strictly so called. In the largest sense, Canaan included a circle of the Jordan, which is what I just said. Canaan, where Lot went, Canaan circled around it. But as we go on through, and Lot dwelled there within that city of that land. But hey, Christ Temple, I done heard this preached twice this morning. All of the atrocities of Gomorrah was going on. And it doesn't say specifically, but it attracted Lot's attention. Not that Lot participated in it, but it attracted his attention for two reasons. We find that this is where the two angels came to Lot. And as Lot saw them walking up, he got up to greet them. Told them to come on in and sit a while, sup with me. At first, they backed off and said, no, we're just going to talk to you out here and then we're going to move on. But Lot convinced them to spend the night. Lo and behold, the men of Sodom came and knocked on Lot's door and told him, where are those two men that came to your house? Like I said, I heard this preached twice this morning. They said, or Lot said, they're inside. Lot anticipating what they wanted, he told him, I got a daughter that's never known a man. Let me send her out to you for you to do as you will with her and leave the men alone. They said no. As a matter of fact, they said no so forcefully that they began to try to break the door down, and the two angels inside grabbed Lot and pulled him back inside. Just so that they could not get to him. They backed off and said, send them out to us. We don't want your daughter, we want those two men. Now, Christ Temple, what in the world would those men of Sodom want with those two men? Come on, Christ Temple. Now, what would they want with those two men? Now, the Bible tells us that those two men were real fair looking, but they were still men. It got so heated until the Lord told Lot, take your stuff and them and get thee out of here. go to the mountains. Now, I'm not a feminist and all that stuff, because the Bible tells us that when he went out and he had told them what not to do, and he had told his family what not to do, who was the one person that looked back? And she turned into a pillow of salt. In the olden days of when I was growing up, if my father had told my mother, don't look back, come on, let's go, she wouldn't have looked back. But as we've come into today's world of modern women, she wouldn't have gotten as far as Lot's wife did, or Sarah got, before she been looking back and said, what's going on? You ain't told me nothing. Why am I running? Why am I leaving my house? Why am I leaving my home? Well, she never got a chance to get that answer because he had told her what would happen, and it happened instantaneously. So therefore, Lot and his daughter continued on to the mountain, where they dwelled in a cave, where they were able to look back and see what was going on in Gomorrah. And at the same time, Abraham, from where he was, he could look out across the field there, because the Lord had taken him to a mountain where he could look out over all that land and see for quite a ways. He could see all the smoke billowing up. And naturally, he was curious at what was going on, but he wasn't finna go over it because the Lord didn't tell him to move. That was another question that came to mind. How many of us would have been able to stay where we were rather than go over there and investigate and see what was going on and what was causing all that smoke? I got a nephew over there. I want to know what's going on. How many of us would have been able to restrain ourselves as Abram restrained himself? That would not have been an easy task either, would it? Knowing all the time that if you went over there, that might not be the best for you, because you had no idea what was going on. But as he kept his cool and went on, the Lord has said in the interim, and we get down to verse 15, which is 16 really, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. That's where Genesis 3 comes in. No man can count the number of stars. And if you can't count the number of stars, and even looking at them way up in the sky, they are larger than a pebble of dust. So if you can't count the number of stars, how can you count the dust? Now, it tells us, as we go on down through there, and we're getting toward the conclusion of the lesson, and the key verse is verse 18, but we're going to touch on 17 before we get there, that if we follow what thus saith the Lord, then that reward will come to us without any hesitation. And then we get to verse 18, and 17, he had told him, says, arise according to the common of the orient of speech, in the length of the land and the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. Now he's given him a whole lot of land. It wasn't an inheritance, but he gave it to him. That's where we come to get our land from, because he gave it to Abram, and Abram was to distribute it around. In verse 18, it says, which is the key verse, it says, Abram took his tent and removed it from his tent, which means he left his tent. came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. And then, acting immediately as the heavenly voices directed him, he pitched his tent and dwelt, settled down, made a central point of his subsequent abode in Canaan. In order for him to have peace. But there was an Amorite chief that came to Abraham. Now, from all the esoteric that I could understand, the Amorites were not super friendly, or they weren't friendly to Abraham and Lot. It didn't say that they were at war, but it said that they weren't friendly. But one of the chieftains of the Amorites went to Abraham. And he went to Abraham in Hebron, which is 22 miles south of Jerusalem, on the way to Beersheba, a town of great antiquity, having been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. As to the city of Arba, and appeared to have so called unto the conquest, the occurrence, or more probably Hebron, was originally named the city. And this Amorite warned Abraham of the dangers to come from his people. In other words, he told him, said, you know, you in my land, but you might just have to have a fight. You might have a war here. And he became an ally of Abraham in dwelling in the land. The moral of it is, through leadership in the church, just as through leadership with Abraham, he was able to conquer all things that God had set him out to do. In the church today, there's a lot of us that don't want to follow the leadership of the leader. Instead of sugarcoating it, there's a lot of, I won't say a lot, but there are some in Christ Temple that don't want to follow the leadership of Pastor Cox. They may or may not voice it, but there are some that don't want to follow his leadership. There are some that don't want to follow his vision. But Christ Temple, I'm here to tell you, just as God instructed Abraham and sent him on his way, God sends pastors to churches. Now, it's true that you get the right to say which one is going to be your pastor, and a lot of times we choose the wrong one. But he sends that pastor to that church and giving you the choice, just as Abraham gave Lot the choice to keep harmony. But for those churches that make the right choice in their leader, God blesses them and makes them prosperous. I know y'all have heard him say many times, the Lord will add to Christ Temple as he sees fit. But when you're following his plan, he'll see fit more often than not. Why won't we be like Abraham? Yes, we have a mind of our own, but we also have a leader. And I'm sure he can tell you, I'll question him in a minute, but I won't go against him. If I see something that I don't think, I'll call him up and ask him. But there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing. Because if you call him up and you talk to him, just as Lot and Abraham talked, and they came to an amicable solution by me calling him up and talking to him about what I don't like, he'll think about it and maybe. But that's a good leader. And that's a leader leading by divine purpose. Reverend Cox.
It's not, sometimes it's not always about what you don't like, or, the progress of the church,
Mm-hmm.
what you're here. Sometimes, people may have an idea,
Yeah.
or a suggestion.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes, looking from the pulpit out, we get stale sometimes, with our, we got a certain way we think, a mode of leadership and everything, but the congregation, that's why we're one body.
Yep.
So everybody has suggestions, everybody sees, different things in the church and what can be better and how we can do things better. So it don't always have to be that negative, I don't like, or, we got a problem with this and that. So
Yeah.
always open to that.
And you're 100% right. I was speaking from the standpoint of there are some here, and you may not want to admit it, they just downright don't want to follow you. They downright challenge you, but maybe not openly on every turn you take. That won't do like myself or Deacon Gibson and our departed brother, call you up and say, look, Pastor Scott, I think so and so and so and so and so and so. Have a discussion. You see, just like Abraham and Lot came back and he knew that the land wouldn't sustain him, they had a discussion and decided that it was best to go that route. I hope that somewhere along the line in my discussion this morning, because I didn't have the book that I have now, and I had to, and I called Pastor Cox and I talked to him about it as to what it was and what was the best route to take. And he gave me a suggestion. And so I went through the exegesis and went through the scriptures there. And this is what I came up with. And it's pretty close to what is to be said about our dealings and our leaders in worship. Because he's not just a pastor, he's your leader in worship. He shows you and teaches you how to worship. He brings you to that worship point. And we can't worship unless we have him there. And most of all, before we even get to him, we got Jesus Christ at the head and standing tall. I thank you this morning.
We got our Sunday school books in. Deacon Boyd will be our teacher for the month of September. And I thank him.
You'd be welcome.